This is part 10 of Jim and Jamie Dutcher's The Wisdom of Wolves. We are on chapter 9. So here we go. Oh, if I share screen, derp. Doop, doop, doop. There we go. Chapter 9, Cherish One Another. From Jim's perspective. A misty rain gathered on my windshield as I raced toward Wolf Camp, pushing the limits of my old van on the windy road over Galena Summit. I had been away from camp for the night, caring for the second litter of sawtooth pups, Matomo, Amani, and Matsi, who had to go through a round of vet checkups before they could join their new pack. The crew member who was in charge of the pack while I was away had driven the muddy Jeep track to the town of Stanley after dark to call me on my call from a payphone. One of the wolves was missing. The wolf was a sibling of Kamat's and Lakota, a mysterious and shy female with a coat of black and brown and piercing yellow eyes. We had given her the name Motaki, the Blackfoot word for shadow, quote-unquote. She was the pack's original Omega in the earliest years, before Lakota took on that role and before Jamie joined my life at Wolf Camp. I had bonded with all the wolves of the Sawtooth pack, but Mataki had a special hold on me. Other wolves may feel the biological pull to be alpha, but Mataki didn't have an ambitious bone in her body. She avoided the minor confrontations and dominance displays that are part of life in the wolf pack, in a wolf pack. As sometimes happens in human society, her sensitive spirit regulated her to the bottom of the social order, and she accepted that. As the original Omega, Mataki was the first wolf to show me how important that role was within the wolf pack. I could see how her gentle nature helped soothe tensions and create harmony. She was always the one who could get a game of tag going and put every other wolf in a playful mood. Although she sometimes had to endure dominance and aggression, she howled with the rest of the pack, slept with others, and always joined them at the feeding time. There was never any doubt that she belonged. Like Lakota after her, Mataki sometimes spent hours away from the rest of the pack, retreating to the denser forest to be alone. I had learned not to worry if I didn't see her for a while. This time, however, she had failed to show up when the field assistant brought in food, and that was not like her. I arrived at camp and began searching along with the crew. The first thing we did was walk the perimeter of the enclosed territory to make sure a fallen tree hadn't brought down a section of the fence. Finding the fence intact, I doubted that Mataki had left the enclosure. We had designed it with an inward overhang at all corners so that even the most athletic wolf wouldn't be able to climb over it. A 6-foot apron prevented them from digging under it. There was even a solar-powered electric wire added to the fence for good measure, and there was no sign it had stopped functioning. The realization that Mataki was most likely still inside did not bring any sense of relief. It meant that she was close but unable to join the others. So we moved in from the fence line and began to crisscross through the aspens, willows, and evergreens where she might be hiding. I found her in an aspen grove at the southeast end of the enclosure, lying still and silent almost among half-fallen trees. Across her belly ran a deep gash. The gentlest, most playful wolf whom I had known was dead. My first thought, one I am not ashamed, one I am somewhat ashamed to admit now, was to wonder if the other wolves had done it. I just didn't think of any other explanation, but the more I looked, the more I could see that the pieces didn't fit. I had never seen her enter into a violent confrontation with the rest of the wolf pack. But if she had this once, her legs and hindquarters would have borne the scars that wolves deliver in these fights. When I inspected the wound, I could see that something had started to eat her, then stopped. The other wolves? Again, it didn't add up. This might occur under the most desperate circumstances, but not in a healthy pack with a steady food supply. Plus, wolves eat by tearing at a carcass and ripping off sections, and Motaki's body was still intact. Something about the way she looked brought a memory back to life. Years earlier, I had documented the life of a mountain lion for my film Cougar, Ghost of the Rockies. I remember how the cat I filmed would always lick and clean away the fur from before beginning to eat her prey. When she ate, she always opened up the belly first. The pieces started to fit. The pieces started fitting together. With a picture of a new culprit in mind, I began searching for clues. Next to where she lay was a partially toppled aspen tree. Where the trunk forked 7 feet off the ground, I found black wolf fur. At the base of this tree were the dull claw marks of wolves, as if they had been trying to get at something up in the tree. Months earlier, I'd seen them claw at the base of another tree beneath a woodpecker's nest in a vain attempt to reach the bird. When new marks looked exactly this, these new marks looked exactly the same. I looked around for the paw prints of wolves or any other animal, but found nothing. I had been it had been dry before the incident had rained since. So the chances of finding prints were not good. Nevertheless, I began to piece together a picture of what most likely had happened. The cougar, moving through his territory, had likely climbed a tree close to the fence and jumped in. Mountain lions and wolves have been known to kill each one another, competing for territory. It was possible that the lion had caught wind of the wolves and taken them as a threat. The cougar had probably caught Mataki by herself while the rest of the pack was far away. The kill would have been swift and silent. The single crew member at camp was too far away to hear any commotion. The wolves may have caught up with the cougar, driving him to drag Mutaki's small body into the tree. But eventually the cougar let go of his prey and dashed back over the fence to escape the pack. A fence containing a wolf would barely have slowed a powerful mountain lion. For a while I was so wrapped up in my own feelings about the loss of Mataki that I didn't consider the feelings of her own family and most loyal friends. A wolf's grief may not be obvious, but as I observed them, I began to see the subtle signs familiar to me because it's so much like the behavior of grieving humans. As anyone would as anyone who studies them will confirm, wolves usually engage in some type of play every day. This was certainly true for the Sawtooth Pack. After Mataki's death, a full 6 weeks went by, during which I observed no play whatsoever. Mutaki had been the main instigator of play among them, and without her they just lost the spirit. Normally when wolves gathered for a pack rally, they would howl enthusiastically together, often punctuating their song with excited yips, whines, and happy Chewbacca vocalizations as they whirled about each other in a display of camaraderie, pressing shoulder to shoulder. Following Mataki's death, their howling took on a different tune. They still howled, but not as a group. It was a long, slow howl, the kind of howl a lone wolf might make when it is searching for a lost pack member, not the lively rally sounds I was used to hearing. On several occasions, Kamatsu and Lakota didn't even bother to stand up to howl. The arrival of food still generated some interest, but other than that, they still seemed to drift about in a listless manner. Head lowered, eyes down, ears back, their behavior was not unlike that of a dog that has lost a human companion. There's only one word I would use to describe it: grieving. After 6 weeks, the wolves began to return to some normalcy. Introducing the second litter of Matsi, Matomo, and Amani gave them something to focus on and maybe even a sense of hope. Yet months later, after Mataki's death, I observed some of the most moving behavior I'd ever seen from the pack. I was walking among the aspens with the pack following curiously behind me, as they sometimes did when I reached the spot where I had found Mataki's body. As the wolves caught up, they broke away from me and inspected the area, silently sniffing the ground. At that moment, every one of them took on the posture of a submissive omega. Even proud Kamatz had his ear pinned back and his tail dropping low. There's no better way to explain it than they were depressed. I I would have given anything to know what was going on through their heads as they did this. How much did they comprehend her absence? How deep was their understanding of death? At this moment they appeared to grasp what had happened at that exact location many weeks before, and they were mourning the loss. Mataki had been their littermate, sister, playmate, and packmate. She was a cherished member of their family, and I believe they missed her. Perhaps the wolves even remembered trying and failing to help her. That's where my speculation ends. I have no doubt that they felt the pain of losing her, but I'm fairly certain wolves don't experience regret or self reincrimination. Humans certainly do. Once I realized what had happened to Mataki, I doubled my own agony with 100 should-haves and if-onlys. In some way I admired the wolves for their ability to experience grief in its pure form, feeling the loss in all its intensity and then moving forward. Among my regrets, analysis, anger, and blame was a realization that I didn't fully comprehend how deeply they cherished Mutaki until she was gone. The project was only in its first year. The behavior I had witnessed had always simply been wolf behavior, quote unquote, to me. I couldn't quite understand that within all their interactions, the eye contact, the gentle games, the pressing of shoulders while walking, were countless expressions of affection. I came to understand these things so fully, so completely, only when faced with their absence. When Mutaki died, something began to change in me. Until then, I had thought of myself as a wildlife filmmaker. I had always assumed that after the Wolf Project, I would begin a new film on a new animal subject. But seeing the wolves grieve and struggle with the loss, and seeing them shower so much affection and care on the second litter of pups, I realized I wasn't just a filmmaker anymore. My work and all my energy and passion I put into it was for wolves now. Gordon Haber was one of the wisest biologists I've ever known. He was one of the first to write unabashedly about the devotion wolves have for one another. He began to notice that courting wolf pairs snuggled while walking and lying together. He reasonably surmised that this has the same value as it does among human couples, a reaffirmation of their special bond. He especially noted that wolf pairs maintained this physical closeness and displayed emotional attachment, quote unquote, well outside of mating season. Just as my clearest understanding of wolf family bonds came at Mataki's untimely death, Gordon's most moving observation of the devotion between a pair of wolves came at the moment when that bond was shattered. The male and female were one of the last alpha pairs of the Toklat pack that Gordon observed in Alaska. They paired in 2002 and together endured the loss of their first pups to a marauding bear, but by the end of 2004 they had successfully raised 2 litters. Most of the Toklat's territory fell within the huge protected area of Denali National Park and Preserve, but some of it fell outside the park's boundaries. The hatred of wolves burns just as hot as in many parts of Alaska as it does in the lower 48. Some of the most vitriolic anti-wolf people run the legal trap lines just outside the borders of the Denali Park. Wolves, unable to discern whether they're inside the park or out, run into a gauntlet of death the moment they cross the invisible boundary. One of these leg-hold traps just outside the northeastern boundary of Denali ensnared the Toklat alpha female in January 2005, just before mating season. Leg-hold traps don't kill outright, they simply hold the wolf in place to starve and suffer from a painful wound. If a wolf is lucky, the trapper will appear within a few days to finish the job. The Toklat female languished in the trap for 2 weeks before she was finally shot. During her entire ordeal, her mate stayed in the area, most likely by her side. It's quite possible he brought food to her, desperate to help but ultimately unable to keep her alive. When at last she was killed, he and the young fled the area. The loyalty he displayed during that ordeal would have taught us enough, but his behavior over the next weeks would prove even more heartbreaking. When he and his offspring left the trap site, they crossed back into the national park and returned to the den site where most of the pups had been born. There the male dug through the snow and cleaned out the den, removing the leaves and loose soil and readying it for a new litter of pups that he would never father. The next day, he traveled 14 miles back to the spot where she had been trapped, moving at such a fast pace that his pack often struggled to keep up. He searched for his mates with an intensity that Gordon called almost obsessive, quote unquote. He probably didn't see his mate die. When the trapper appeared, fear likely overwhelmed his senses and he fled into the forest. Perhaps he heard the gunshot and understood what it meant, but perhaps not. Most likely all he really understood was that his mate was in trouble and then she was gone. Did he prepare the den and search for her, believing she was still alive? Or did he do those things because he was distraught to the point of madness, unable to accept what he knew? When you look at wolves only as vermin or as identification numbers, nothing can explain his behavior. Only through the lens of our human empathy does it become clear. He and his mate had begun the process of pair bonding after they had first met. They flirted and snuggled and affirmed their affection for each other in a way that any human would recognize. They had suffered the loss of their first litter and persevered through the ordeal together. They worked tirelessly as a team to raise their subsequent litters, powerless to help as she died. What else would he be feeling? The Toklat pair was as closely bonded as any human couple. They expressed their bond with a purity and openness that only the most enlightened humans would achieve. When he lost her, his grief was equally pure and terribly sharp. When Gordon left him in mid-February, he was standing on a high plateau howling over and over in the direction of the trapping site. How far would this wolf have gone to help his mate if he were able? As humans, we like to think that altruism and sacrifice belong to us alone. After all, it's not an easy mental or emotional process. The act of risking personal harm on behalf of another requires a complex cognitive analysis to take place before the ultimate moral decision. First, one has to be able to foresee an undesirable outcome for another. Then one must deduce that putting oneself in danger might deflect harm away from others. And one must decide that saving oneself is not as important as saving the other, whether an individual or a tribe. We humans are inclined to claim all those cognitive processes and emotions for ourselves alone. But those who spend their lives observing wolves have observed exactly this type of behavior, the ultimate display of devotion, and sacrifice. Recently, Jamie and I were in Yellowstone National Park talking to Rick McIntyre, who has been monitoring the park's wolves since they were first reintroduced there in 1995. At this last meeting, he told us the incredible story of the Lamar Canyon Pack alphas. The Lamar Canyon Pack had struggled for over the years. Hunters had killed the pack's original alpha male and female. The next alpha male was a bruiser of a wolf known as Big Gray. Took over the pack with a new alpha female, only to have it dissolve. As the rest of the pack dispersed, one subordinate female, called simply the Black Female, stuck by Big Gray. Eventually she became his mate and the alpha of the reborn Lamar Canyon Pack. Together they produced 6 pups in 2014 and held on to a territory in the northeast corner of Yellowstone. As one of the few places in the lower 48 states where wolves are protected from hunting and trapping, Yellowstone now has a dense wolf population. As a result, territorial conflicts between packs appear to happen more frequently than elsewhere. As wolves move to follow elk herds, there is a high probability that they will cross into another pack's territory, possibly sparking conflict. In March 2015, the Lamar Canyon Pack did just that. With their 6 yearlings in tow, they set out westward on a hunting trip. The black female was pregnant with her next litter. Wolves seem to like to ramble in the early months of a new year before their pups are born. They probably know that a period of restricted travel and responsibility is coming and want to have one last hurrah before settling into their den site. Once they return to their territory, the alpha female begins the process of clearing out last year's den and readying it for the new pups. The Lamar Canyon Pack's journey took them across the territory of the larger rival Prospect Peak Pack. Outbound, they had crossed without incident, but they were not so fortunate on the journey home. As they attempted to cross, 12 Prospect Peak wolves descended on them from the east. The pregnant female and the 6 yearlings made a beeline westward, backtracking. In her condition, though, she could neither fight nor outrun the Prospect Peak wolves. The yearlings were barely older than pups. That that left Big Gray as the only wolf of the pack capable of confronting the attackers. As 12 Prospect Peak wolves charged up a hill, he turned to face them. Rick McIntyre watched it all, and, as he said, quote, "The action was deliberate, taking courage and resolve to have your enemy run straight at you while you stand your ground." End quote. As the Prospect Peak wolves got close, Big Gray ran straight downhill back through them. It happened so fast that the Prospect Peak pack had to turn around to go after him, giving Big Gray's mate and the yearlings more time to escape. The yearlings watched as the Prospect Peak wolves caught up with their father and fell upon him in battle. At their age, they had neither the muscle of full-grown adults nor the experience to fight a battle like this. Still, they could run. One of the yearlings ran back into plain view, and when the Prospect Pack wolves saw him, a few peeled away from Big Gray to give chase, but they couldn't catch him. A second and a second and then a third yearling did the same, drawing off more attackers. Big Gray was left in a 4-against-1 battle. Rick says he watched them fight for about 5 minutes until they disappeared into deep sagebrush. He assumed Big Gray had not survived the assault. Soon Rick began to hear howling in the distance. The Lamar Canyon yearlings and their mother were calling for Big Gray. The Prospect Peak pack, also hearing the howls, went looking for the Lamar Canyon wolves, but they couldn't find them. Eventually, the Prospect Peak pack gave up their search and returned to the site where they had left Big Gray, but he had disappeared, and they had lost interest. But one young Prospect Pack wolf picked up Big Gray's trail and followed it, only to find that the Lamar Alpha had a lot of fight left. Without 12-to-1 odds, the young Prospect wolf turned tail and ran. Big Gray, bleeding and gravely wounded, disappeared into the sage. From this point on, all Rick knows is what he was able to ascertain by monitoring the signals from Big Gray and the black female's GPS tracking collars and following their movements. The next day, he listened as the black female signal showed her returning toward the danger zone, inching closer and closer toward her mate as he lay there, weak and unable to move. By nightfall, the two signals were side by side. She had come to say goodbye. A GPS collar is programmed to give off a special signal if it remains motionless for a certain length of time. This is called a mortality signal. The next morning, Big Gray's collar began emitting that signal. The signal from the black female's collar showed that she had moved safely back into her territory at her den site. Rick believes that she had made a deliberate decision to visit her mate one last time. Quote, the black female had to find her mate, end quote, Rick went on, emotionally affected by his own story. Quote, she had to let him know that it was not in vain, he says. She was safe, his unborn pups were safe, and his yearlings were safe, end quote. To follow the ever-changing fortunes of Yellowstone wolves is to witness a real-life saga, complete with acts of heroism, sacrifice, tragedy, and resilience. Objectively, of course, there are no real heroes and no real villains. Wolves do what they need to do to survive, and they are always full of surprise. The Lamar Canyon Pack saga continued beyond this epic moment. The black female found herself in dire straits with a new litter of pups and 6 inexperienced 1-year-olds, still needing support. So she accepted the advances of a wolf called Twin, none other than one of the Prospect Peak males who had attacked her mate only weeks earlier. Ultimately, 3 other Prospect Pack males left their pack and joined them in the Lamar Canyon territory. In true wolf fashion, they helped raise Big Gray's pups. His legacy lives on. So much of what we hear about the devotion wolves have for one another comes from observations of bonded pairs in epic tales we've heard from Yellowstone and Denali. After Chemuk joined the Sawtooth Pack and grew to maturity, we were able to witness this kind of pair bonding firsthand between her and Comets. Once nature had ordained that they became the alpha pair, Their relationship became stronger and stronger. Comets would make sure that his mate had a secure place at every meal. He was emphatic about this. There would be no squabbling. It said turn off again. Anyways, continuing. He was emphatic about this. There would be no squabbling. Chumuk would eat first with him. It was a complete reversal from the way he had treated her when she was a pup. Over the years, we saw again and again how every wolf in the family cared deeply about every other wolf in the family. In the beginning, it was evident in the way the young pack reacted to Mataki's death. Throughout the project, it was the special friendship between Lakota and Matsi as Matsi projected the Omega. In the end, it was the ever-endearing bond between two siblings. When Waikin died, her devoted brother Wahats was found posted by her side. For me, the moment that truly drove home the depth and power of the Sawtooth Pack's devotion to one another was one of the last moments Jamie and I had spent as their constant companions. I had always known the wolves could not stay forever in the idyllic territory beneath the Sawtooth Mountains. Our land use permits expired and the Forest Service would not issue another extension. After a great deal of negotiation, we reached an agreement with the Nez Perce tribe to build a new home for the wolves in northern Idaho. It was huge. It was a huge relief, but it also meant our time with the pack was coming to an end. The move from the Sawtooth Mountains to the Nez Perce Reservation in August 1996 was probably the most stressful event of these wolves' lives, and of ours too. We did our best to ease their transition, transporting them overnight when it was cool, but I can only imagine how bewildering it must have been. We waited until the heat of the day had nearly passed, and in a painstakingly coordinated procedure fed each wolf a piece of meat that contained a sedative, reinforced with a mild injection. We covered their eyes and gently placed them in the crates. There was no need to do this to the pups, Ayat, Motaki, and Pia. They were still so young that we just picked them up and placed them in the crate. Comets did not want to go under. Perhaps knowing the safety of the pack rested on his shoulders, he resisted the tug of sleep. Watching our trusted friend stumble, fight to his feet, and then finally succumb to the sedative was pure agony. Even worse, as the drug began to wear off and the wolves awoke safely in their crates, Comets did not rise. We had given him a fraction of the dosage that government veterinarians routinely administer to wild wolves, but his heartbeat was faint and his breathing shallow. More than any other more than any of the other wolves, the pack needed him desperately. It seemed to take forever, but finally his ears twitched and his eyelids fluttered. We could see he was conscious but unable to rise. His yellow eyes, usually so bright and alert, seemed to be gazing at something invisible and far away. I reached into his crate and put my hand on his neck. "I'm sorry," I told him. "I'm so sorry. It's going to be okay, I promise." Jamie knelt beside me and whispered, "Comets, please wake up. We need you. We can't do this without you." Jamie and I agreed that the best course would be to make the trip and end the ordeal. We carefully hoisted the crates into a horse trailer. As the sun began to drop into the sawtooths, we pulled out across the flats toward Stanley and the north. We drove in silence, Jamie and I in our van, following behind the trailer, thinking of comments inside. Finally, I signaled for our caravan to pull over. Fearing the worst, I released the latch and carefully swung open the door of the trailer. Comets was sitting upright in his crate, blinking. I put my hand up to the door of the crate and he gently licked my fingers. A collective sigh went up from our small group. He was a bit groggy, but he was going to be fine. 1 second. His eyes caught the moonlight as he looked at me, and I could see the old confident comments returning. Comments. There was so much trust in his gaze. I wish I could have explained to him the reasons for this ordeal we were putting all of them through, and how painful this was for me too. But he looked, but his look reassured me. Just after 4 a.m., we arrived at on Nez Perce tribal lands to the site of the new wolf enclosure. Our headlights spooked a flock of wild turkeys which fled off with ruckus. Those turkeys were about to have a rude awakening, I thought. It was still dark, so we settled down to sleep in the vehicle and let the wolves rest until sunrise. The elevation was considerably lower at the new home. I could feel the thickness of and humidity of the air, and I suppose the wolves could feel it too. After sunrise, we carried the crates into the enclosure and lined them up side by side in a grassy meadow. We thought that it would comfort the adults to see the pups free and safe. It would give them something on which to focus besides the discomforts of travel and the strange new surroundings. So we let the pups out first. Piyip, Ayet, and Mutaki bounded out of the crate and into the grass. Still at the age of blissful ignorance, they were untroubled by the trip and eager to explore all the new sights and smells. And then they turned back to see where everybody else was. Comets was the first adult to be released. For a moment he held his head low, tucked his tail, and looked around tentatively. It was a posture of uncertainty. I think the only other time I saw him carry himself this way was after his sister, Elder Mataki, had died. I could see just how stressful this was, even for him. Still, he went straight to the pups and inspected each one. They gathered around their father in a frenzy of licks and whines, overjoyed to see him again. We let Matzi out next. He enthusiastically greeted the pups and then lowered himself slightly and licked up toward Takamatsu. As quickly as we could, we released the others, Chamak, Matomo, and Amani, while Hats and Maiken. Each wolf went first to the pups, then to Kamatsu. It was similar to their customary morning greeting, but with considerably more whining, licking, and reassurance. They obviously had a lot to talk about. We purposely let Lakota out last. If he had been able to greet the pups and comets before the others had a chance to, they might have used him as an outlet for their stress. We opened the door of Lakota's crate, but he held back. The pack had begun to move around, sniffing the ground with growing intensity, confident enough to begin exploring their new territory. Still, Lakota did not emerge. Comets must have noticed. He stopped his explorations, turned, and walked back to stand beside Lakota's crate. The two whined back and forth for several seconds. At last, Lakota, wide-eyed, poked his head out of the crate and took one tentative step forward. After that, Comet stepped up and pressed his shoulder against his brother's. Lakota lifted his head, then walked into their new home side by side. Then they walked into their new home. Watching that scene, I could tell that Comets would never leave his brother behind, no matter how stressful the situation was. He understood that the wary Lakota needed a little encouragement, and he knew how greatly to coax him forward. It seemed fitting that, as Jamie and I prepared to say goodbye to the pack, they would make such a profound gesture of their devotion to one another. Later that afternoon, we gathered in a field a few hundred yards from the enclosure where Nez Perce tribe conducted a small ceremony to welcome the wolves. Amid the sound of drum beats and voices, we began to hear a distant harmony rising up into the air. The wolves, responding to the music, had begun to howl. I remember looking at Jamie holding her boom microphone, recording audio of the event with tears streaming down her cheeks. The pack counted to the pack continued to howl after the human song ended, and everyone stood motionless, listening and until the last sound drifted away. Several years later, when we received word that Kamas had died, we were deeply saddened. The life of a wolf is so short, and he had meant so much to us. Comets was the strong leader that the project needed, and I really believe that he was the one who held the project together through all its years. In Comets, we saw the power and wisdom that gave the other wolves confidence and security. Comets taught me so much about the companionship and trust that wolves have for each other. He showed me that if one is lucky, a wolf may extend that honor to a human as well. Losing an animal friend like Comets is doubly painful, for I can never know if he uh, realized how much he meant to Jamie and me. Nor did he know that as we went on to tell his story, he and his packmates are known worldwide as wolf ambassadors, sharing their truth with everyone. This is our greatest consolation, that people are starting to understand wolves better and to know them as deeply emotional, caring, and family-oriented animals that deserve the chance to survive. For 3 weeks after Comets' death, a single wolf was heard howling alone in the night. Knowing them as we did, we figured it was probably his brother Lakota, grieving the loss of his magnanimous brother and friend, and letting the world know. It's the end of chapter 9.